What if I told you as an NCAA champion and collegiate record holder, my contract with Nike wasn't even $100,000? Would you believe me if after being ranked number 2 in the world and becoming the 3rd fastest man in the 60-meter dash that I never made 6 figures with Nike? I'm going to talk to you guys about contract negotiations, what I learned from switching from Nike to Adidas, and how I felt slighted by Nike, all in the process.
Welcome to Defeat is Optional, the podcast where I'll give you the best mental tips to unlock your mind so you can improve your performance on race day. If you've ever felt stuck, doubted your abilities, or struggled to bring your best on race day, you're in the right place. This isn't just about training harder, it's about thinking smarter. Here we'll break down the mental barriers that hold you back and build the mindset that propels you to victory. Because in your journey to greatness, defeat is never the final answer. It's a choice. So let's get to work. Remember, Defeat is Optional is not just a podcast, it's a way of life. How did I end up at Nike in the first place? And then how did I end up with Adidas? So I don't know if you guys saw, but the story that I posted earlier basically just said, what if I told you that I did not make $100,000 base contract with Nike when I was signed with them for 5 years? Being a collegiate record holder, being an NCAA champion, my initial contract was less than $100K. And even after I became the 3rd fastest man in the world and was ranked number 2, I never got paid more than 6 figures from Nike, right? So kind of crazy. We're going to dive into those stories. 9 years ago is when I signed my first contract. That was in 2017. I graduated from TCU in 2016. So how did that all transpire, right? So as I was in my senior year, I had won the NCAA championship indoors. I broke the collegiate record. That was I believe it was in Alabama at the Crossplex. Crazy story. I actually started my collegiate career at that track. I ran my first track meet at that track and ended my last indoor track meet at that track, which is really cool. So anyway, I knew that I had the potential to go pro. Now, here's the lesson, one of the first lessons that I learned when it comes to professional track and field, that if you want to become a professional that's sponsored, you need to be in an NCAA final. That is the first lesson that I learned. If you're not in the NCAA final, it's going to be very hard for you to get sponsored as a professional track and field athlete. Now, you can go and run afterwards. However, if you want money from these big shoe companies, you need to be in an NCAA final. That's the first lesson. And not just any NCAA final, right? You need to be in an outdoor NCAA final, because the whole thing with when I went into negotiations my senior year, basically after my senior season, after the NCAA championships, there wasn't Olympic Games that year. And I actually went to the Olympic trials. I did not make the Olympic team. However, when I first got news and talked to Nike, the number that they were offering me was a good 6-figure contract. But when I did not make the NCAA 100-meter final, that number plummeted. And it was because I did not make the final. So the people that get the contracts, that get the most money, are the people that either win or are in that final. They get looked at. They're in that spotlight. I was not. So my stock just plummeted. From there on, I was going back and forth with Nike, and I did not actually sign my professional contract. I didn't sign it in 2016 after my last race as a collegiate athlete. I did not sign my Nike contract until February of the next year. So luckily, I still had a semester left of school, because if I didn't, I was going to have to pay rent, work a job. I was going to have to find a way to pay my rent. I mean, everyone knows that if you've been in a situation where you can't pay your rent, or you know that you're doing everything that you can to pay your rent, and you're still going to be come up short, like that's where I was at one point, because I hadn't signed a contract. I was graduating that December. And after that graduation, like TCU wasn't going to be fitting the bills for me to live, to be an adult. And I hadn't signed a contract yet. So I was literally filling out applications potentially to go work and then train, because I knew that I could succeed at the next level, but I was going to have to work a job in order to do it. So we were going back and forth. And this is the reason why it took so long. One, because They had a bunch of different athletes that they were trying to figure out contracts with, and then they were gonna try to figure out what money they had left for me, basically, because I wasn't again in the NCAA final, so I wasn't getting first pick of, collegiate athletes that are getting money, but also, you have all the other top athletes that are already running. So they had to figure out those contracts too because it was the end of the year. Now, another big thing was that another lesson that I learned here is that the first lesson is that if you want to be a professional, you need to, and you want to get like money and you want to get sponsored by a shoe company, you need to be in the NCAA final. You need to be in an outdoor NCAA final, not an indoor one. Because I had won an NCAA title indoors and broke a collegiate record. But for these shoe companies, they don't really care about indoors. They don't care. Unless you're breaking a world record, they do not care. You do well indoors, they pat you on the back and they say, good job. Like, keep it pushing. Let's see what you can do outdoors. Because at the end of the day, my coach always says this. He says, there is no indoor Olympics. And he's right. There's no indoor Olympics. So the companies, they don't care about that. So that was lesson one. Lesson two, really in contract negotiations, is that these shoe companies, they will, especially Nike, I know for sure. Nike has people that they pay. They have coaches that they pay around the country. And you guys probably know them. If you look at any group that has a ton of Nike athletes, guess what? Nike's probably paying that certain someone. And so what happened is when I was coming out of school, they wanted me to move coaches and go train with the people that they're paying. That makes total sense. But I had gone from a high school athlete that was running 10-7 consistently to a collegiate senior who was running 9.9s consistently. I had run 991 a couple times. And so the progression that I had, I was just like, I don't want to leave my coach who I've been with for 4 years, trained with for 4 years, won two NCAA titles with, and gotten faster every single year. That just doesn't make sense for me to move and switch coaches. So I didn't want to switch coaches, and they wanted me to go out to California. They wanted me to go to Florida, but I just didn't want to leave my coach. So that was kind of the runaround, was that they wanted me to move and I didn't. So we were going back and forth with that. I ended up signing my first contract, guys, for $60,000. 60K with my first professional contract, which honestly for a single guy coming out of college, that's good money. That's pretty good money. I had more money than I ever had before, and to be honest with you, like I it was good. Like, it was good. I had a good time. I pay my bills, pay my rent. I was pretty set. Okay. So that was the those are some of the lessons that I learned. If you go pro, most likely they're gonna want you to move because they have coaches that they pay. That's kind of standard. And then, you know, if you're not in the NCAA final, your stock is going to drop, which means your negotiating power drops too. So if you're not running fast, your negotiating power, it's out the window. And that's where I was. I never actually made an NCAA 100-meter final in my 4 years at TCU. So that was a little bit harsh, but hey, it is what it is. So that's how I ended up with Nike. Now, my contract with Nike, I was going to show you guys the details, but just so I protect myself. I don't think that Nike can do anything, but I'm not trying to get sued by Nike. So either way, I'm just going to tell you guys some of the details. I was with Nike. My contract was for 3 years with what's called an option year. Now, option actually a 2-year option. So an option year, all an option year is that Nike can say after the 3 years that they were initially with me, they could say, "Hey, we're gonna reevaluate where we believe you are, and we're gonna decide if we're gonna take an option." The option year is basically like, we have 2 extra years on the table that we can have, like, you can be our athlete, but we have the right to say we don't want you or not, right? That's kinda what an option year is. And typically when you have option years, it kind of protects the company a little bit because for me, I did really well in 2018. I was ranked number 2 in the world, but behind their number 1 guy, which was Christian Coleman. And, because I was on the option year coming out of 2019, I had no negotiation power because one, I had a crappy 2019 season. But even if I had a really good one, with the option years, it's really hard to negotiate. They take the option year and you really don't have any negotiate. It's not a time to renegotiate your contract. So you kind of just are locked into what you already have. Now, after my 2018 season, I did get a bump in my pay, and I was making 90K a year because of the bonuses that I had just from, you know, basically running fast. I think I had a $30,000 performance bonus because I was ranked number 2. Boom. So now my base contract went up to 90K, and that's basically where I stayed for the next 2 years. So, I felt like for me that I was underpaid, and I think that most people here and most people in the track and field world would agree that I was underpaid. I saw the guys that I was running against and beating on a regular basis getting paid boatloads more money than I was, and here I was, working my butt off and beating those guys. So, for me, it was really hard to justify like where I was at and knowing that I was worth more. Okay. And it's not like I was entitled to that. Like I knew I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. Like I was actually working my butt off and actually performing to that level. So I think there's a difference. A lot of people get into this thing where they feel like they're owed something or they deserve this type of money or whatever the case may be. And most of the times when you are evaluating yourself, you overshoot. And I may have been, but I knew how hard I was working and I knew the results that I was producing, okay? So, here's another lesson I learned is that because after the 2021 Olympics, so I was with Nike for 5 years, they took the 2-year option, so that means I was locked in for 5 years no matter what at the same contract price. Now, after 2021, I went to the Olympics, I made my first outdoor championship team. I placed 5th in the Olympics, and I think that that was the Olympics that Nike felt like if I was gonna do or be anything, it was gonna be in that one, basically. Because 2016 was my first Olympic trials. I was coming out of college. They figured, hey, this one's probably not gonna be the one that he pops off at, and that's fine. We're really paying him for, you know, the next one, which was 2020. So I actually made that team, and it was great. I felt like, okay, I had a really good season. I ran 983. I was ranked top 5, I believe, that year in the 100 meters. And so I felt like, okay, I've definitely worked and earned my keep as far as what I feel like I should be paid now, right? And that's one thing for me to believe that, but my sponsors gotta believe that as well. So all in all, we went into the contract negotiation. Now this is how it works. So when you finish a contract year, you cannot and you're a free agent. Technically, there's no option year. You know that, hey, I can go shop around to these other shoe companies. Now, you can't actually talk to anybody because of the clauses in the contract. You can't talk to anybody until December 15th, I believe, is the date, which sucks because you know, December 15th is the end of the year. And a lot of these companies are doing their deals early so that they can, for budgeting purposes, they don't want to go into the next year having to figure out contracts. So, December 15th is kind of the day where it's like, all right, now I can officially talk to whoever I want to talk to. So basically after that day, my agent starts reaching out to, other companies, seeing who's interested. And pretty much there was no bites. At 28 years old, made the Olympic final, ran 983. Apparently nobody wanted me, which was crazy because I felt like, after that year, making an Olympic final, that should be the year where I should, this is going to be my second quote unquote contract. It should be a little bit bigger. Now, here's the biggest thing that I learned from this part of getting this contract with Adidas is that shoe companies, they do not care what you've already done. They don't care what you've done. They pay you based on what they think you're going to do. That's literally how they pay you. They don't pay you on all the accolades that you've accumulated. They don't pay you on all the races you've won. They don't pay you on how fast you've run. They pay you on what do we see this person's foreseeable future as, and that's how they pay you. So that is one of the biggest things. Like if they don't see that you're going to be valuable to them in the next 2 to 3 years racing, or at the next Olympics or whatever basically the Olympics, they use the Olympics as the gauge. If they don't feel like you're gonna be successful at the Olympics, then they're like, "Hey, buddy, we're not gonna give you you're not gonna give you this, or this." They did offer me something going into the 2022 season. Now, we ran into the same problem though when I first signed with them after college, is that they wanted me to move coaches. They felt like you know, I hadn't gotten it done with my coach, and to an extent, I will say this, like, I hadn't gotten any outdoor medals. I'd been hurt a lot of the years. I did get a bronze medal in the indoors, but I wasn't again, these companies care about outdoor times, outdoor medals, outdoor competitions. And so I didn't have any medals. That was the biggest, I think for them, that was the biggest thing of like, okay, well, he's done really well, but he hasn't won anything. And so I totally understand that. Like for me, that's one of the biggest drawbacks is not having one of those. Anyway, going into contract negotiations, they offered me way more money this time. However, they wanted me to move. The first place they wanted me to move was to Jamaica, and I couldn't bring myself to. Well, my wife at the time was pregnant with our first child. I had been in the house that I was in Texas for over 5 years, and I would have to leave my coach, who I had basically been training with for the last, at this point, would have been 6, 11, almost, no, it would have been about 10 years. So I would have to leave my coach of 10 years, who I've gotten better with every single year. I would have to move to Jamaica. It would have been so different. And then I would have to move my pregnant wife there, have my baby in Jamaica. It would have just been, it would have been a lot for me at the time. So, so yeah, that was just not gonna happen. So I told them no on that. Although they offered me like a boatload more money, well beyond 6 figures. I said no. I turned it down because at the end of the day, like the money was just not worth it at that point. And then they wanted me to move to Florida, with Dennis Mitchell. I love Dennis, but I didn't want to move there either. So I didn't want to leave my coach. Like I was committed. I'm committed to my coach. I have a really good relationship with him for a long time. And a lot of the times, like I have been very injury prone, so a lot of the times I would just be injured or something like that. But it never, whenever I was healthy, I always ran super well. So as long as I could stay healthy, that was like a big thing for me. But anyway, they offered me a little over 100K after I said I was going to stay with my coach, which for me it wasn't enough, especially with the guys that I was running against. I was like, I know what everybody else is getting paid. Like they're my ears to the ground, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But at the end of the day, I was like pushing my agent like, "Hey, we need to find somebody that's gonna give me some money because at the end of the day, if not, I'm gonna be forced to take this contract again that I don't really wanna be in." And it's not that I didn't wanna be with Nike, it was just that I felt like I should have been paid more, and I did not wanna move, across the country at that point in my life. And so, yeah, so negotiations, my agent was trying to figure out, how he could get another deal. Wasn't happening. Long story short, I had a conversation with my now agent about Adidas, right? And I told my old agent, I was like, "Hey, I'm not committed to anything, but I'm going to have conversations." So, had a conversation with them. They brought back a number that was well within what I believe that, I should have been paid. And pretty much from there, it was a hard decision because I was going to have to step away from the agent that I've been with for 5 years, that we developed really good friendship and relationship with. However, it was to the point where like I knew that this was going to probably be my last contract, and I needed it to be a big one, especially just with how hard I've worked. Like, I'm not going to run track forever. That was basically how that transpired. I ended up signing that contract, worked with a new agent, got that contract, and that contract, because what happens with contract negotiations is that the company that you're with typically will put inside the contract that they have what's called a first right of refusal. And the first right of refusal, all it means is that whatever offer that you get from another company, they have the right to look at that offer and then either match that offer or decline that offer. And so whenever and obviously if they come back and match that offer, that's a great thing because then the company that sent the offer over either goes up, or or you take the one that they matched, or if they go higher, whatever. So it kind of gets into a little bidding war, which is cool. That number got sent over to Nike, and basically they in the contract, there's 10 days. They have 10 days to basically respond. And in 10 days, they didn't respond. And so I talked about how I felt slighted. I felt slighted because I felt like, man, like, first of all, outside of Fred coming up into the 100 and getting a silver medal that year, I was there, I was the next guy. And so I was just like, wow, like they didn't feel like I was worth that amount of money, but also they just didn't really want to sign me for another 4 years. And so, someone that the company that I felt like, hey, I'd done a lot for, run well for, again, they don't care about what you have done. They care about what you're gonna do. And so, yeah, man, that's basically how that transpired. I ended up running one more meet, which was the Millrose Games in 2022, which, oh my god, I got so sick at. I remember I like trying different food. And it's not that I have never eaten Indian food, but this was 2 days before the meet. I'm in New York, so I went to go get some Indian food, and dude, it was just I just got so sick, but it was only like a day thing. It was just like I kinda like I got food poisoning, and then the next day I was fine, but obviously I was still feeling it. So I had a day to kind of like recoup, and the next day I ran. I still ran 650 something. That was the race where it was like the big go back between Trayvon Bromell, Christian Coleman. I was there. It was a good meet, but no one was talking about me. I got 3rd. So, I felt like I could have won that if I was healthy, if I wasn't sick. But, props to those guys, man. That was a fun race. But either way, that was the last time I ran in Nike because after that, they never responded after those 10 days, and I ended up signing that deal with Adidas, and I've been with Adidas ever since 2022. So those were just, I mean, man, when I look back on just contract negotiations and some of the lessons I learned, man, one of the big things is like a lot of people ask me how to go pro. And the biggest thing, man, is like you have to just run fast. Like everyone's trying to figure out, like, even kids now, they're trying to figure out how they can be pro without running fast. Like there's no way you can do it. You're not gonna get a name, image, and likeness deal. You're not gonna get a deal because you're famous on Instagram or you do cool stuff. Like you gotta go run fast. Like that's it. The people get paid to run fast, and then the cool stuff that you get to do because you run fast happens after that. But you gotta run fast. And if you want to be talking about getting a big deal or shoe contract, like you need to be in an NCAA final, and that NCAA final needs to be an outdoor NCAA final. And if you want a really big one, you need to place in the top three. When you sit down and you negotiate a contract, you need to negotiate the right bonuses. You need to negotiate, for me, I didn't have in my contract, I did not have any indoor bonuses. So like all the fast times I ran indoors, I didn't get paid for them because it just wasn't in my contract. And so some people have that in their contract, some people don't. I didn't. So, as far as I did run, it didn't matter. So that's a big thing. I'd say that it's harder to go pro in a world championship or Olympic year as well, because typically, if you are running well at the NCAA level, if you don't win the NCAA title and you're like maybe fourth or fifth, that's still good. However, if you're in from the US and it's an Olympic or world championship year, the negotiations for contracts probably don't start until after the trials, which is hard because they wanna see how you stack up against the professionals because that's what you're gonna be doing. You're gonna be running against the professionals every single week. So they wanna see how well do you perform, Do you fold? Do you choke? Do you persevere? I feel like it's kinda like a chopping block or a proving ground is USA trials for those years. And I feel like it's harder to get contracts because typically if you do well at the NCAAs or you do kind of mid, you're in the middle of the pack, and then you go into the USAs and you don't do well, I feel like your stock drops even more because now you didn't make the team or you didn't perform well enough. So now they're kind of looking at you like, how are they gonna perform in the next couple years? Because that's how they pay you. They pay you based on what they believe you're gonna do. And then just being aware that, they're gonna depending on who you're signing with, you're gonna probably want you to move coaches, move areas, which is fine, but you just have to be okay with that and comfortable with it. And yeah, man, those are some of the big things that I've learned, man. If you guys have any questions, I will take some questions real quick just about that whole scenario. But that's really how I ended up with them. I just felt like, hey, I wasn't gonna get paid what I wanted to, like what I wanted when I was with Nike, and that's totally fine. God made a way and opened a door for me to be able to be with Adidas for a long time. James Stokes, what's good, my guy? He said, "What would you have done differently, knowing what you know?" If I knew what I knew now, I would probably, like I said earlier, I'd probably put some stipulations in there for my indoor stuff because I did run really well as indoors and potentially, negotiate whether I could have bonuses into my indoor contracts, like for my indoor running, which typically does not happen again because there is no indoor Olympics. But I could have probably made a couple dollars doing that. So yeah, that would have been one of my biggest things. That would have been my biggest thing. Let me see if there's any other questions. Someone said, "Are you going to start indoors?" Yeah, so I'm going to be starting my indoor season in a couple weeks. January 29th is the first meet. Do you think switching shoe brands has changed how you perform? I don't think so, Speed. I think that for me, one of my biggest challenges is coming back from the Olympics and just all the mental stuff that I had to go through with overcoming just the disappointment from the 2021 Olympics was really hard. I talked about that. I've talked about that on a lot of my podcasts. I've talked about that on here in my lives. But I think that has been something that I've been dealing with and coming out of. I don't think it's necessarily the shoe brand or anything with the shoe, but I think that for me it was more mental. The last couple of years have been more mental than anything, and just getting in the right headspace to do well. Because I believe that you don't just lose talent out of nowhere. That's what I believe. And so I knew, a lot of people when they have bad seasons, they switch coaches, they find someone new because whatever the program they're doing isn't working. But I knew the program worked because I'd run fast. I knew the program worked. So I knew it was me. I wasn't going to blame anybody else. Like I took full responsibility for that. Matiko says, "Do you think your agent was the problem when you had bad deals? Because seems like you got a better contract ever changing agents." Well, I wouldn't say my agent was bad. I think that sometimes, depending on where you are at, because track and field, I feel like there's literally track and field agents that are still agents that have been agents for like 50 plus years. So I think that what that says is that there aren't a lot of new ones, meaning that the relationships that the agents have, they've had for years and years and years. So I think that whenever you sign with a specific agent, especially in the track and field world, they already have connections to certain shoe companies. So like if you sign with someone, they most likely can get you a New Balance or a Puma deal, but they probably won't be able to get you an Adidas deal. It just depends because the relationships are very different across, different agents. So I wouldn't say that my agent was bad. I just think that connections were just different. Let's see. Tino says, "Do you negotiate the terms yourself, or is it all through your agent?" Well, typically, I mean, the contracts. A lot of the contracts are very blanket contracts, meaning they don't differ. I feel like a lot from athlete to athlete. I think that there's sometimes that you can put some special things in there for like big bonuses if you want, but and I think the difference is that like everyone probably has a world record bonus in their contract. The difference is how much is it worth? Mine might be different than someone else's. Mine might be lower than someone else's. Who knows? So that's kind of how that works. But as far as negotiations, the agent does a lot of that. I feel like if you have some special requests, you obviously can run that by your agent. But you know, that's kind of how that works. I feel like your agent does a lot of that. And because the agents have very long lasting and relationships with these companies, they kind of like go into these negotiations kind of knowing what they're going to put together. And I feel like if you wanted something different, then you'd probably get asked for it. Maybe that's something that I would do now that I know better. But yeah, I mean, you get to look over the contract before you sign it. No one forces you to do it, so you get to look over everything and sign it beforehand. So if you don't like something, you just say, "Hey, I don't like this. How can we change it?" And then that's how the negotiation continues to go on. How do signature shoes work with running shoe deals? There's not very many people that have their own running shoe. And to be honest with you, like Allison Felix, they made a shoe for Allison Felix with Nike, but I mean, she has the most medals of any athlete, I think, in track and field history, and they didn't do that until like she was about to like retire. Like probably 3 years they made like this shoe, and it wouldn't even have her name on it or anything. It was just like they made this shoe for her to run in. But again, that's why Allison Felix made her own shoe. So I don't think that they do that a lot of times. I think that was more of I mean, Michael Johnson had his own shoe. Yeah, but there was Michael Johnson back in the day. He was like the best runner to ever do anything. He broke 2 world records. So break a world record, maybe you get one. So, but yeah, man, I am going to hop off here. I really appreciate you guys hanging in with me. And this is probably the most viewership we've had. Talked about money, contracts, all kinds of things. It's been really cool. I will tell you that there is money in track and field. People always say that there is not money in track and field. There's money in track and field. Yeah. I've made well over $1 million as a track and field athlete. I can proudly say that. A lot of it has come from my performances and how well I've done, but there's money in track and field. Now, there's not millions and millions and millions of dollars like there is in basketball and football, but there is enough money if you run well enough to where you can set yourself up. You can have a nice home. You can buy a nice car. You can set your life up to where, you know, the next few years are going to look good for you if you invest your money right and do the right things with it. That's what I'll tell you, because everyone always complains about. It's funny because the people that make the most money complain about there not being money in the track and field space. So there's money there. There's lots of money. You just have to run really, really well, right? It's about what you focus on. So, all right, guys. I will see you guys tomorrow at 6 p.m. We're doing a question and answer. So if you guys have questions that you're asking right now that I'm not going to get to, bring them to the next one, and I will. I'll basically answer any questions that you have. I will answer this last one at the bottom, though. Synergy says, can you advocate for yourself? You can advocate for yourself, but I feel like it's not really advantageous, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Like if you're, coming out of college and you don't know what you're doing, probably not the best. And also, again, because there's these deep-rooted relationships with these companies and these agents, I feel like sometimes they don't take you serious as an athlete doing it on your own. They'll find ways to like potentially just screw you over. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I always have a professional doing that with you. That way they can be a voice and they can be your voice. But anyway, I love you guys. I will see you guys tomorrow at 6 p.m. We'll do a question and answer. So bring your questions. I will talk to y'all tomorrow. Peace.